I'm Brady Pinheiro-Walkinshaw. I am the CEO of GRIS, the National Environmental Media Publication, where we are an environmental media nonprofit with a team of about 50 people, journalists, editors, video producers spread out around the United States. And our mission at GRIS is to make the story of a better future so irresistible that you want it right now. And that mission of trying to tell a story about how the future can be more just is certainly relevant to this discussion we're going to have here tonight. So I'm thrilled to welcome two people who I've just had the chance to meet. This is a trans-Pacific conversation. We have Matt Blomberg in Phnom Penh and then Christopher Smith in Los Angeles. So I just thought by way of introductions, maybe I could pass, stay in the same time zone for the first introduction and pass it to Christopher, and just maybe introduce yourself and perhaps share how the two of you met and how you came to this project.
Sure. So my name's Christopher. I'm a documentary filmmaker based out of Los Angeles, but I've primarily worked on environmental films up to this point, and I was looking for an environmental story to tell that could be told in a little bit more of an exciting way, like an environmental thriller. And I was sort of inspired by a few films that were out at the time. And I was actually just kind of trolling around on the internet where I came upon a story written about Paul and MCC and like the exciting jumping on the boats aspect of what they were up to down in Cambodia. And I just reached out to Paul, and within a few weeks, actually, I was down there filming what I thought was going to be a short film. And while I was there, I met Matt, who happened to be on the island. It was what they call Khmer New Year, or it's like it's not the actual New Year, but it's when the rainy season starts again, which is in about mid-April. But it's a big holiday there, and Matt was on the island, and we started getting to talking while we were filming. And I kind of realized that Matt was one of the primary people, if not one of the only people, really reporting on these issues in the ocean, or environmental issues related to the ocean, in addition to some other environmental issues that he was working on. And the more we were talking to him, the more it became clear that there was more to the story than just jumping on boats, and that it could be a feature film rather than a short film. And we kind of just hatched some plans, and I ended up coming back a few months later, and I went back probably a total of 7-8 times over the course of 3-4 years. And Matt kind of became my right-hand person as we kind of investigated the story. He was already really knowledgeable about it and had already done a lot of investigating, but he was kind enough to show me the around, and we kind of did some traveling, explored the issue a little bit more on camera. And I knew right away that Matt, you're an interesting character, so I kind of wanted to put him in front of the lens too. And it's nice to work with a journalist on documentaries because they have a lot of context and insight, particularly in a foreign country. And Matt had already been living there for 5-6 years up to this point. So, as a journalist, just knew the ins and outs of what was going on.
Maybe across the Pacific, to Matt, maybe just introduce yourself. And I mean, the film is gripping in the way that it sort of introduces you as how you came to be an investigative journalist in Cambodia and how you found your way to the English language paper. And so, I mean, maybe just share your story.
Matt, my name's Matt Blomberg. I'm Australian. I've been living in Southeast Asia since 2012, and I like writing stories. I like annoying people who destroy the environment. And I was working at a newspaper here in Phnom Penh for a few years when I stumbled across this same story that Chris stumbled across. I was actually out in the ocean for the 40th anniversary kind of celebration. A bunch of US Marines came to Cambodia to go to this island where a bunch of their mates had been killed in what was called the Last Battle of Vietnam. And while I was out in the ocean, I noticed these, all kinds of fishing boats that I and no one else had ever really seen before. And that's kind of what got me starting to look into it. And then I found out that it was so fascinating and that there was this basically pirate activity going on in the ocean every night. And I left my job at the newspaper to go and I'm going to make a film about this because this is mental and someone needs to make a film about it. And then I have no such skills. And then I was down there for a few weeks and on the island. And then Paul, lead pirate Paul, says, you know, I've got this filmmaker just contacted me who wants to come out here and make a film. You're already kind of doing this. What? And I kind of had to think about it and said, yeah, get them here because I'm in way over my head here. I've got a small camera and no education in filmmaking. And then Chris turned up, and thank God he did, because the story, the film warranted, you know, it deserved to be looked after and done by someone who really knew what they were doing.
Well, there's so many aspects to the film, and what I loved about it was there are so many characters, and there are moments when there's all sorts of drama, and then there are other moments when you're learning about marine ecology and marine conservation, and you have these great young women who are on their paths into academics and a career, hopefully, in marine conservation. I was just curious, maybe starting with you, Matt, was what's your at what points were you scared at any points in the making of the film? I mean, were there periods when you were with some of the Vietnamese boats and near them, were there moments of fear?
Yeah, definitely moments of fear. I mean, when you're out in you're kilometers from land and on these rickety old boats, and these dudes kind of turn against you. I mean, they know that you're there to get in their way. And as you will see in the film, there's some pretty gnarly weapons involved. You know, there's shanghais and butcher's knives and cleavers, and these fellas use these weapons too. And yeah, there was a few little skirmishes that we got into that were definitely, I mean, there was a line in the film, but I think it's gone now, where I said, you know, sometimes we spend days or weeks looking for certain things, and then we'd finally see it, and it would be, you know, dudes with weapons attacking us as we tried to intervene while they were fishing, and part of you was kind of like, you know, here it is, get out there and see it. Part of you wanted to run to the back of the boat and hide, and another little part of you also wanted to get involved in the action, because, you know, it was a real battle, and the people that we were working with, that Chris and I were working with, were you know, became pretty, you know, heroic kind of characters to us, because what they were doing was putting their asses on the line every day to save a patch of ocean, which was pretty cool, pretty inspiring.
I'd agree with that. You know, being from the States and, you know, the kind of a first world country, you might say, and then going to Cambodia, there's a lot of things we take for granted, like, you know, a good healthcare system and like 911, you know, being able to rely on things when you get into trouble. And, you know, the thing about Cambodia that's both really inspiring but also kind of scary is that you have to be really self-sufficient and no one's going to come, you know, save you. And also, you know, there was a few moments that didn't make it into the film, but one of them was, you know, a knife fight thing that we filmed like feet from us. And, you know, you do kind of get caught in the moment, but then when I look back at the footage later, you know, and you just kind of like see the violence, and it's just like not, I don't know, it in some ways it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, you know, where you're just kind of like, why does it even come to this? But, you know, as a filmmaker, I know I personally want to try to capture things that normal people don't get a chance to see, either because they're not aware of it or because it's risky to some extent, you know, and, you know, I think that for that reason, I was like excited about it, but then you start getting all the things running through your mind about like, oh, we're miles from shore, a lot more miles from a hospital with, you know, good medical care, and, you know, miles from people I'm related to, like thousands of miles, you know. So, and I'm getting older, you know, I'm like about to turn 40. So I'm not quite as like adventurous maybe as I used to be.
Agile to escape to get back.
Exactly. My knees are giving out, you know.
You know, one thing that struck me that I loved was that you went into such great technical depth in describing the negative impacts of the dragging of the electrified nets along the ocean floor and how horrible it is to all sea life on the ocean floor, and the bycatch that comes up, and all the negative consequences of that. And I thought that was really well done. And I just was curious, maybe it's a two-part question. One, I was curious if you're now seeing, you were building these kind of concrete towers to underwater to kind of interrupt the dragging of the nets. I was just curious if those have been successful and effective. And then the other piece of the question was, I'm just kind of curious if you felt like the film created momentum around questioning some of the fishing practices of dragging these electrified nets.
Do you want to take the first part, Matt, and I'll get the second?
Yeah, certainly the blocks have had an effect. I mean, if a fishing boat comes and its net gets caught on that, the fishermen on that boat have a few problems. The first one is the net. So when it gets hooked on that concrete block, its engine is going to start to roar. And then these lunatics that live on this island are going to hear the boat roaring, and they're going to know that they've got someone trying to come into their area. And then secondly, in order to escape, they're most likely going to have to cut the net to run away before these guys catch up with them. And the nets are worth thousands and thousands of dollars. And obviously these blokes on the boats are just working for, someone else. And if they go home without their net, they're absolutely going to get their asses kicked. I don't know how many months they'd have to work to pay back the amount of money that they've just lost by cutting the nets. So it serves as a deterrent, at least in that way. And for sure, they're definitely keeping these trawlers out of the area that MCC has dropped the blocks.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I think we just to follow up on that real quick. I think that they would say too that there's it delineates the perimeter of the conservation area, and then they kind of threw in a bunch of ones that are not on the map as a way to kind of further act as a deterrent. And but there's a lot of them. There's it's a huge swath of ocean and swathe of ocean, and there's I think it's 70 square kilometers, and then there's probably 70, 80 of these things. So it's taken a while to build, and they're not quite all there yet. But so the film comes out actually November 17th, and so most of the world still hasn't seen it, and most of Cambodia hasn't seen it at all, because I don't think it's screened there at all yet. So we're looking forward to see what happens. And as part of our contract with our distributor, we made sure that they had to release it in Southeast Asia before a certain time. If not, then we get the rights back to be able to release it. So that is a primary goal of the film, is to be seen in Cambodia and to hopefully inspire some change. That was another way that we approached this film, was to kind of, initially I went in trying to make it a thriller and, kind of dark and, scary, but then kind of got to thinking about it would actually have a better impact if it were inspiring. And in a country like Cambodia, I think a lot of people there, it's been kind of pushed around by a lot of countries, and it's in the middle of kind of featured in the Vietnam War, and then you had the genocide and the Khmer Rouge, and then it's just kind of, I feel like they kind of, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but a bit of an identity of being pushed around. So I actually think an inspiring way of revealing these issues rather than pointing a finger and pointing blame, it would actually be more effective, which is, what we're hoping to accomplish with the film.
The young people were very inspiring in the film. I mean, the characters of some of the young people were really inspiring.
For sure.
They are, Brady. And also, you mentioned about the work that was done to kind of really lay out how this bottom trawling works. Right. And I've been blown away by because some people in Cambodia have seen it. Some of my friends have gone and watched it, on the various film festivals that it's been at. And the big response from them, and seafood is the number one source of protein here in Cambodia. Everyone eats fish. Almost every day people eat seafood. And the most amazing response has been young Cambodians coming back to me and saying, wow, I had no idea that this method of fishing even existed, or that this kind of destruction was going on, or that there was this much corruption or violence behind this seafood. So in terms of impact, I think so far the greatest thing is I get emails and messages of youngsters who are like, wow, thank you for explaining this to us, because we had no idea.
Well, that led it to me with kind of one of the other policy questions I had at the end was you started to show how Cambodian officials were getting more involved, and there was more authority being given to kind of police the waters around the area, the protected area. And I was also just curious about kind of the geopolitical aspects of the relationships between Cambodia and Vietnam. And that the film didn't touch as much on that, but I was curious, are you seeing is this something that the Cambodian government brings up with the Vietnamese government in kind of trade negotiations, or is it not really reached that level?
Well, I'll let Matt answer that in depth, but about the film piece, we kind of had to focus a little bit on what we wanted to talk about, and from my understanding, it's such a complex issue that we wouldn't be able to do it justice in the amount of time we had. So we kind of had to leave some things a little vaguer and unanswered just out of the media because of the format.
Totally.
It is, Brady, a very, very complex relationship between Cambodia and Vietnam that is characterized by a kind of fear, and you could even say hatred by Cambodians of Vietnamese people due to perceptions about Vietnamese encroaching on land, encroaching on the ocean like this. Cambodia's forests have been destroyed, and a lot of the timber has gone over the border illegally and to Vietnam. And there's a mass kind of feeling among the Cambodian people about the Vietnamese themselves also encroaching on Cambodia, and more Vietnamese people settling in Cambodia. And there's two very distinct cultures. And then the higher level kind of complication is the fact that the Prime Minister to this day was a Khmer Rouge soldier who fled the country during the war and kind of came back with the help of the Vietnamese troops to overthrow the Khmer Rouge. So people say that he is still beholden to the Vietnamese government that helped him take power. So there's many layers to this. It's really complicated, yeah. And I don't know that it'd be being brought up at a high level.
So you haven't seen that sort of kind of the Cambodian Navy, or there hasn't been sort of that intervention to police the waters to keep the Vietnamese.
We kind of touch on it on the movie, and people who know Cambodia will realize it. But I mean, the truth is that the Cambodian Navy and the Marine Police and the Fisheries Administration, which you see in the film, have all been taking a cut from these Vietnamese fishing fleets for years for the right to be able to fish Cambodia's waters.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think the missing piece here too is that, in Cambodia, the government recently, within the last 10, 15 years, started devolving a lot of the power to the provinces. Mm-hmm. And so there is also a lot of kind of province to province communication between the Vietnamese, province that's on the border there and the Cambodian one. And, Matt, you probably able to speak a little bit more precise to this, but my understanding is that they'll sometimes arrest Vietnamese fishermen, but then immediately turn them back over to boats and not actually ever try to prosecute them, because it would kind of cause problems up the chain, or because they're, the local Cambodian officials are being paid off by Vietnamese fishermen, or, there's all sorts of, the politics there are way more intricate than the politics in the States, without a doubt, because it's within the country, then it's between the countries, but then it's locally, and then it's, there's a lot more things that you have to infer because people don't speak so directly about things, and it's just also interpersonal politics. There's just all sorts of interesting. That's what makes it so interesting, to be honest with you, from a filmmaking perspective.
Who are some of the characters in the film that were most inspiring to you? And when you were making it, who were some of the most kind of gripping stories to tell?
You know, it's like everybody, everywhere you point your camera in Cambodia, in my opinion, is just fascinating and beautiful and cool and interesting. Like my first time there, I'd never been to Asia, let alone Southeast Asia, before making this film. And but my producer, who I worked with, Stephanie Lincoln, she had lived for a few months in Cambodia, and you know, she was like, "Oh, you're gonna love it." But you know, if you've had that experience of like going for the first time, it's, you know, you're just like, "What's happening over there now?" You know, and then you just it's like just everywhere you look, eye-opening. But you know, in terms of stories, you know, I really thought the girls Vida and Rachana are really inspiring and interesting people, and I really wish we could have featured even more of them. But they're, you know, it's like when we first went out, they weren't on the island until about halfway through filming, and then they kind of were students and just kind of doing research, and then, you know, Rachana kind of factored more into the everyday work that MCC was doing towards the end of the project. And you know, so I would have liked to feature them more, but it just, the reality was that they hadn't quite like factored into this quite as much until near the end. But I wanted to put them in there because I thought it was important for Cambodians to see local Cambodians doing important things and kind of leading, even if they're younger, you know, they're stepping up and making a difference. And, you know, that, which brings up another point, that Matt and Paul are both white men from other countries. Paul's from the UK, Matt being from Australia. And, you know, from the beginning, we were really trying to find local Cambodians who were doing this kind of work. And you know, the reality is that there are Cambodians doing environmental work, but they tend to be focused more on the forest and land issues. And even they are oftentimes already thrown, you know, incarcerated or dead, or, you know, it's really dangerous for Cambodians to be doing that kind of work. And same with reporting. So, you know, I'm not saying that there was absolutely no one we could have found, but we had a hard time really finding people working at the level that Paul and Matt were on this issue. And so we tried to bring that out of like, why is this the case through the film, which is why we kind of followed Matt to that classroom of students who didn't want to be journalists. And, you know, Matt talks a bit about how environmental activists get killed in places like Cambodia. So, but it's really inspiring to see the girls for that reason. You know, they're stepping up in a potentially dangerous field of work. If not dangerous, then it's not as lucrative as something else they could be doing.
Yeah.
Another really cool character that I think is worth a quick mention is Puppet. He's only in the film a little bit, and this guy is he's about a 40-something Cambodian guy who was born in Cambodia during the war, and went to a Thai refugee camp, and then became a refugee in the United States. And in recent years, there's been a bunch of we call Cambodian Americans. You know, they're the size of Americans, but they have all the Cambodian features, and a lot of them. The biggest population of Cambodians, I think, is in Los Angeles, right? And there's a lot of these Cambodian refugee kids who landed in Los Angeles and got involved in street gangs. And then under Barack Obama, there was a new law. He started this program of sending back to their home countries refugees who didn't have full citizenship and who had committed a crime. So there's this wave of Cambodian American dudes who grew up on the streets in Los Angeles and were in street gangs. And got sent back to Cambodia over the last 5 or so years. And these were the types of characters that were on the island when I first went there and wanted to make the film about it. There was 4 or 5 of these dudes who were, you know, covered in tattoos from being in prison in America, grown up on the streets in Los Angeles, and were now out on this island kind of fighting against these Vietnamese fishermen. Really interesting. I mean, there's a film in that as well.
Definitely. We actually focus on that a bit when we started making this, but unfortunately Puppet kind of had to leave the island. He's married and has kids, and he had been there a long time, but ultimately had to go back to Phnom Penh and get a job there. So we didn't quite have as much with him in the movie as we wanted, but he's really interesting. Before he worked with Paul, he actually worked on the Mekong Delta studying birds with a scientist. And weirdly enough, one of my really good friends lives in Portland, and I was up there visiting him like about a year into making the film. And his roommate heard that I was working on a film in Cambodia, and so came out to the bar to meet us. And it turns out that he was the scientist that Puppet used to work with. So,
what a small world.
Yeah, totally.
The other character that I think would be great to mention too, just as Paul is such a powerful character in the film too, and so central. And I did love the scene. That one scene was just adorable with his daughter is talking about their love of the oceans. And I just wondered if, I was just trying to think of a question related to Paul, but he seems to have so much. I mean, I don't know if you wanted to reflect a bit on the relationship that Paul had to the film and the significance of this film for him and for his family too.
Yeah, I'll give you my perspective, which, as a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker in particular, you always have an interesting relationship with your subjects. And I'd say they're all kind of different, but there's this tension of, you want to do a positive thing and share their story, and you think it could do some good in the world. But, more and more people are more media savvy about how that can go wrong and, how they're portrayed. And when you have a character like Paul and actually Matt too, because they're kind of similar in a lot of ways, where, they're even more or less likely to trust people of authority, or people who say they're filmmakers and come out, and with good reason a lot of times. But Paul was always, I think he recognized that the right person could help further his cause and the cause of MCC and make a big difference. But also he had some run-ins with bad press in the past and was a little bit skeptical and didn't really know me. And he's, there's a reason he's living on an island in the middle of the ocean. He's like, views the world differently, than a lot of people do. But, I did my best to factor in all of his concerns. And, my approach to making films in general is first do no harm, but then after that, it's balancing the responsibilities you have to your subjects, but also to the audience and into the world, and then also to the people who finance the film. And, you have all these competing interests. So, I think in some ways that was one of the hardest parts about making the film, was just making sure that I was honoring Paul's wishes the best I could, while still making a good film that actually people would want to watch and also would do good. And, sometimes subjects, we all want to be presented in the best light possible on screen, but actually the best films are when you show somebody's flaws or somebody, because they're more human, and you also need to see the difficulties before you see the successes. And so it's always a bit of a struggle for people to sort of reckon with who they really are when, when presented on film. Not that that's the totality of who they are, but, how they kind of come off. So in Paul's case, what he saw an early cut of the film, and there was a few things he really didn't want that I thought were important moments, but, he made a good case about how the film could be better, but also how it could jeopardize his work. And so we kind of I'm glad he did, because I do think the movie's better because of it. And also we were able to make a film that wouldn't jeopardize his work as much, and also would probably inspire other people within the country to do more good. So it worked out for the best.
Any reflections on that, Matt?
He's like Chris said, he's a very interesting character. He sees the world differently. He sent me a photo the other day. I still chat to him pretty regularly, of him in he's kind of building a zombie-proof castle with a moat now to keep out all the humankind, basically, because we're all morons. And
you should probably mention that he's in Thailand now. Because an island is the moat, basically, if you think about it.
yeah. So he's off the island now that's featured in the film, and moved to this piece of pretty jungly land in the south of Thailand, where his wife's from. and is building kind of his own, you know, he's really good at gathering a crowd. Like when he was on MCC, he's the king of the island, right? And he has his team of people around him, all of whom have their role. And you can't hang around Paul and do nothing. You've got to do something. You've got to have a use, you know, a purpose. And where he is now in Thailand, he's kind of building this big stone. He used to be a stonemason. He's building this big stone dwelling for him and his kids and his wife. And it is zombie proof and COVID proof and apocalypse proof. And you know, those kids are special little humans. They get they're kind of schooled in his own way, which is, I mean, they know more about nature and the environment and the relations between humans and animals and humans and everything around them, probably better than any other kid their age, which is really cool. And those kids are kind of being brought up to be, what would you call them? Like, you could say environmental justice warriors or something. I mean, they're all really strong. They're all really can look after themselves. They're really advanced emotionally, I would say. And Paul sent me a photo the other day of him swinging on a hammock. His beard's now down nearly to his belly button, and he had a little piglet on his. He's got a lot of pets. He's got lots of different animals. He loves animals. Yeah. He's always sending me videos of him with his animals. He's pretty happy, I think.
Yeah, you know, I was always sort of impressed by. So Paul seems very standoffish and tough, and like.
And that's how you introduce him in the film. That's why you got to say how Matt had to get close to him. And
yeah, definitely.
Right.
Yeah, that's very much him. But then you see him with his kids, and you're like, he's like a softie, really, at the end of the day. Which is where, you know, he obviously has compassion for animals and things like that. And, you know, he would probably say that he feels closer to wildlife than he probably does people. And I think it kind of just shows in the way, you know, he relates to people sometimes.
Well, I'll kind of work toward wrapping up. I just wanted to say thank you for making it. It was inspiring. What an impactful film. And I hope it has an extraordinary impact in Cambodia and Southeast Asia. And I'm excited for many more audiences to see it. But in closing, if either of you wanted to offer a closing thought as we wrap up, I thought I'd pass you both the floor and then we can wrap up. What time is it in Phnom Penh right now?
I haven't had breakfast yet, mate. It's just after 9 a.m.
Oh, okay. Great.
So you've energized me.
I'll wrap up at the end, but if you got something to say, Matt.
I guess my parting message would be, if you want to participate or donate to any kind of organization that's you know, far away from where you are and doing work in conservation or in anti-human trafficking or whatever it is, have a good look at the organisation that you're donating to, because Paul's is an awesome example of a dirty boots grassroots organisation kicking ass and actually making change. In Cambodia for 20 or 30 years, we've had all of these corporate NGOs, including the conservation ones, who are supposed to be here stopping the destruction of the forests and the fisheries. And science shows clearly that the destruction has only increased on their watch, while their staff are living here in villas and driving expensive cars and getting paid way too much money. Then you've got blokes like Paul and his team living on this island, living off nothing and actually getting stuff done. Look very closely if you ever want to support a cause, because there's a lot of your money goes to waste. Most of it goes to waste.
It's good thought. Matt, by the way,
we could spend more time talking about that, but
yeah, totally. That is so fascinating. And we talked about it a lot when we were filming, just like how the sort of in Cambodia, more so than almost anywhere else, there's like this NGO industrial complex that a lot of the economy runs off of in Cambodia. And they're both reliant on the NGOs, but also kind of don't like that. Like there's like this tension there. It's really fascinating. Matt, you want to tell them what you're up to these days too?
I work for the Thomson Reuters Foundation now. I'm a reporter on human trafficking and slavery in Southeast Asia, which is pretty grim. has some overlaps with this environmental stuff as well, particularly, I mean, you've seen in Thailand kind of 4 or 5 years ago, the AP revealed all those, the Guardian and AP revealed all those big stories about, you know, Cambodians and Burmese and some Thais enslaved on fishing boats. So yeah, I'm just hanging out here for the minute, seeking out the grimmest stories that I can find and then telling people about them and hoping that it makes someone care. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and he just wrote a couple episodes of this like video series that's all animated about people doing activism work around. What you should mention it because it's awesome.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we just put out this series of short animations about kind of people, normal people, really, on the front lines of human trafficking. And I wrote this short about this Vietnamese man who is an amazing character. He's like you wouldn't blink if you saw him. He's such a bland looking and sounding human being. But what he does is there's thousands and thousands of Cambodian, Vietnamese and Lao women trafficked every year into China to be married off to men who can't find a wife. And they kind of get tricked into going there by, you know, promise of a good job or promise you find a husband. And obviously the poorest women are preyed upon and their parents are convinced that this is a good way to get some money into the household. The women arrive in China and they're kind of warehoused, put in you know, buildings and apartments, and then Chinese men come and browse through the women and choose, you know, which one they'd like to purchase as their wife. And they do it, and then they take them home, and then they don't only use them as a sexual slave, they also become a domestic slave, and they also get sent to work and endure these horrific kind of life stories. And this Vietnamese guy that I met, he actually does, he goes undercover into Vietnam, and a lot of these women, they end up in brothels because once the Chinese man has, you know, got a baby out of this woman, he'll often sell it to a brothel because he just wanted a baby, or the woman becomes too much trouble to look after, so he sells her onto a brothel. And this Vietnamese guy goes into Vietnam, goes undercover as like a Chinese gangster or a jack, a man who's going to a brothel, finds these Vietnamese women, breaks them out, and gets them back across the border. Really interesting line of work. And I don't think I've met anyone who's done things. You know, Paul is an extreme dude who does some mad stuff, but this guy is a whole nother level. You know, you can find it on the Thomson Reuters Foundation website.
Cool. Just to wrap it up for me, I'd say you know, there's just some amazing people out there doing some amazing work, like Matt and Paul and MCC and Rachana and Vita, and you know, it's inspiring to me. But you know, if you like the movie, you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/currencyfilm, and then currencyfilm.com is our website. But it will be released November 17th on Amazon, Amazon Prime, Google Play, Vimeo on demand, all around the world in 100 territories, translated into 8 languages. So tell your friends to go check it out. And if you like the film, please rate it on IMDb, and I guess even if you didn't like it, but that would be really helpful. And yeah, thanks for watching, and thanks for, you know, DC Environmental Film Festival for hosting the screening.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you both.